excuse me, this morning we're gonna talk a few different ideas and kind of see how they interact and interrelate with one another. And the title of the talk is, can you see it as being already complete? Can you see it as an already accomplished fact? Whatever it is. Now, it could be, um, as we discussed last week, it could be something that you want to experience more of in your life, more health, more wealth, more loving relationships, more fulfilling activities, more spiritual growth, more spiritual attunement. It could be something that you want to create, not necessarily something that's broken and you want to fix it. You know, my leg hurts and I want it to be fixed. My bank account hurts and I want it to be fixed, those kind of things. But what is it we want to create? What is it we want to create? An important point to consider as we go through this is that in the human concept, the human experience, right? I mean, we form our opinions about life based on our experience, based on what people tell us. And a lot of times it's just not true, you know, it's just their opinion of things. But nevertheless, it shapes us. It shapes the way we believe, and because it's done unto us according to our belief, it shapes us. And the human experience of life is that typically human beings do things out of a sense of need, out of a sense of want. We want to eat, so we so we grow a garden. We want to eat, so we go to work to get paid. We want a house to live in, so we need money. All those kinds of things. In that regard, the human activity at the human level, as far as the bulk of our society believes, right? And not all societies everywhere have believed this, but our culture here in the United States, and perhaps the Western world, our culture certainly believes that work is something you do to get something you want. You have a desire, you have a need, and therefore you have to expend energy to fulfill that. Now, as I say, this wasn't true in all cultures at all times. If you think of people who were living in lush tropical environments where it didn't take a lot of effort to get their food, they could reach out and pick it off a tree, or think of the South Pacific Islanders, they could go down to the lagoon and they could catch lunch. They have a totally different view of work. They have a totally different view of God. Life is about expression. Life is about joy. Life is about celebration. The divine does not do anything out of need, out of lack, out of a want being a sense that there's something missing, you know, kind of an absence, kind of a longing, you know, we miss something. We want to get that back, whatever that was. But the divine doesn't have any of those experiences. It is all that there is. It is everything that there is. It is all-knowing. It is all-powerful. It has enough and plenty. If it wants a universe, it creates a universe. If it wants a planet, it creates a planet, those sorts of things. So in this term, creation is not out of a sense of lack or a sense of need or a sense of must, but the divine idea of creation is a sense of joy. God creates for the joy of experiencing its creation. Joy is the impulse of the universe. Dr. Holmes tells us that love is the creative impulse of the universe. Love is the spontaneous expression of joy. Wow. How wonderful is this? So we want to keep in mind that you have the human experience, which is okay. You know, we're going to talk about that. It's okay. It got us this far. But there's something that needs to take us the rest of the way. And that something that needs to take us the rest of the way is the divine experience. So as we go through this time together this morning, I invite you to adopt this idea of up until now, that may have been so. Up until now. But just because it's been that way for a long time doesn't mean it has to be that way going forward. Dr. Holmes tells us that principle is not bound by precedent. Principle is that it makes no difference how long a room has been in the dark. As soon as you light the candle, the darkness is gone. The principle of light is not constricted by the precedent that the room has been dark for a very long time. Werner Herzog, the documentary filmmaker, was allowed to go into a cave in France, and this cave had been sealed to human activity for over 40,000 years by a landslide or something. And somebody discovered it. And what the French government did was they sealed the area off to keep people from going in and damaging the artifacts that were in there. But because so many people wanted to see it, they allowed Herzog to go in with a camera crew and to film it. And they had to be very careful with the types of light that they used and how much light they used. And this cave had been dark for 40,000 years. And artificial light from the outside or torches, fire, things like that could all damage the natural state of things, and it could ruin the scientific research. Where scientists wanted to go in to see what was there without the interference of modern human beings and modern atmosphere and modern activities and all those things. And Herzog and his camera crew went in, and they had very, very, very low levels of light sources for their cameras. So from a technical quality point of view of cinematography, it was not like you're used to seeing brightly lit scenes. But my point is that even though that cave had been darkened for 40,000 years, as soon as they went in and they brought light with them, the darkness disappeared. And if you've never seen the documentary, it's worth seeing. And if you can see it in 3D IMAX, it's even better, because there's all these paintings on the wall that human beings made 40,000 years ago. And there's a handprint. I think it's the right hand. There's a handprint where one of the people put their hand in the paint. And on this cave is this handprint on the wall, 40,000 years old. It's not unlike our hands. Principle is not bound by precedent. Principle is not bound by precedent. It doesn't make a difference how long that cave has been darkened. When spirit decides it wants to do something, it is done. So we're talking today about this creative process. We're talking about our role in the creative process, you and I being unique, individualized centers where spirit is doing something new and something wonderful, but not creating out of a need, not creating out of a sense of lack, but just creating out of a sense of joy. If I asked you to take a pad and a pencil and go someplace quiet this afternoon, and on that pad write down, if there were no limitations, all the human ideas of limitations were gone, how would you let God's joy express through you today? What way would you allow this joy to express uniquely in this world, as you and through you? That's the kind of starting place that we want. That's where we want to come from in our idea of creation. We want to eventually move out of the mode of something's broken and it needs to be fixed. And we want to move into the mode of, oh, this is my joy. This is when I feel fulfilled. This is the gifts that are being given through me and as me, And that for this moment I have come feeling, the big kind of being in the feeling. There are some things that have to be felt. There are some things that can't be explained. I was looking on the internet the other day. I was reading about music, and they kept talking about the groove of the music, the groove. And I have an idea of what that means, but I don't know necessarily what the author meant by it. So I went on the internet and I started looking for the various definitions of what is the groove. And I'm firmly convinced that there is no one definition, that whoever you ask has their own definition. And this one person was interviewing band members of a small band, like 4 or 5 member band. They were about to perform, it looked like in a club in England. And the person just ran around with the camera and he said, I'm doing a documentary for YouTube. He says, what's your idea of groove? And they all just looked at him like they were flabbergasted, And finally one guy says, well, it's when you're really tight and you're locked in. And the guy said, oh, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, what in the world does that mean, It meant something to that individual. There was a feeling that they had. It meant something to them, but it was beyond words. So what is this feeling of joy? You see, what is this feeling of joy? You might not be able to give it words, but can you feel it? Can you draw a picture that might represent that to you? Can you somehow find something within your communication skills in order to remind you of the joy that you are here to express the joy? So the title of the talk is, Can You See It as an Already Accomplished Fact? Now, part of this comes from Thomas Troward, and Thomas Troward's work when he was talking about the creative process, and I believe it's in his book, The Creative Process in the Individual. He says that once we have seen the end result as an already accomplished fact, once we have seen it, once we have felt it, once we have experienced within our consciousness that very thing which we desire to create, once we really have it, once we get tight and we're locked into it, once we're in that groove with it, once we really have it, see, at that moment in time, we have created within ourselves, we have created through ourselves the ways and means to allow it to happen. We have created within ourselves the channel through which it does happen. Dr. Holmes talks to us about that as well. He says the purpose of treatment, spiritual mind treatment, affirmative prayer, the purpose of treatment is to produce the avenue within consciousness through which the demonstration is made. And I think that's also a very important point. See, we don't have to make it happen. The human idea of things is we make it happen. We want a house, we go out and get a job, or we get blueprints and we buy lumber and hammers and nails, and we put effort into it and we make it happen. But in working with the spiritual nature of the universe, and working with the spiritual nature of our life, we don't make it happen. We don't make it happen. See? We are the conduit through which it happens. Now, think of a water valve. You open and close the water valve and the water comes through, or the water stops, whichever way you're turning the valve. But the valve doesn't create the pressure that makes the water flow through the pipe. The pressure is already there. The motive force is already there. It is already trying to come through. And when we open the valve, we have created the opening through which the flow comes through. So Dr. Holmes gives us this visual image of, if we can imagine being in the mountains, and he says there's a valley in Colorado that's like this. I don't know which one he's talking about. I haven't seen it for myself. But he says there's this valley where way up in the mountains there's a lake way up in the mountains, high up in the mountains. There's a reservoir and it's full of water. But underneath that reservoir there's little cracks in the rock that go all the way down through the mountain and out under the valley floor. And they come up under the valley floor. So what happens is the pressure of gravity pushing down on the lake, the pressure of gravity is pushing that water down through those cracks. And eventually, when the water makes its way all the way to the valley, it starts to squirt up from the floor of the valley. And he says there's all these little columns of water, and some are tall and some are short and some are fat and some are skinny. They're each unique. Each one is unique. But they are each an individualized expression of that water in the reservoir. And because each one has a unique channel, the expression is unique. Short, tall, fat, skinny. And for us, because we are spiritual beings, the channel we provide is a channel of consciousness, a channel of cooperation, a channel of our belief. So what we want to remember then is that we are co-creators. We are co-creators. Spirit has created us out of itself as a unique starting place, a unique place where life can start to experience joy in some special way as you and I, that only you and I can do. Now I'm not saying that that means that we have to accomplish some great life's work. We have to build a tall building and put our name on it. We have to find a cure for disease. I'm not talking about those kind of things. Those are human concepts. Those are human concepts. Basically what human beings are afraid of dying, and they're thinking, well, if I create this big, great work, then I'll already be remembered forever. And of course, forever is subjective. How many people who lived even 100 years ago do we even remember? You know, out of the millions of people that have lived on this earth, how few names are actually remembered. Now I'm talking about joy. Life, God creates out of joy, for joy. What is the joy that we can allow to come into this world? Even if we are the only ones who experience it, what is the joy that comes into this world that in reality the divine is experiencing as us and through us? So Thomas Troward said that once we see the end result as an already accomplished fact, and Dr. Holmes tells us the same thing, Emmett Fox tells us the same thing. This is why we always do our treatment work in the present tense. Once we see the end result now as an already accomplished fact, we have produced a channel in our consciousness through which the motive force of the universe, the creative force, the doer of the word, the Holy Spirit in Christianity, the doer of the word can then move through that opening and produce the outpicturing, the perfect outpicturing of our word. So there's a couple of things that one title brings up, and one is the concept of time. When. The other is the concept of seeing, visualization. And then the third is the concept of the creative process. So let's just talk about those things kind of in that order, and then see how they fit together. So the first thing that we have to remember is when. When is God? It's kind of a silly question. You say, when? What do you mean, when is God? When is God? Right? So we remember that the word God is only a pointer. It is only, Joseph Campbell tells us, it is a metaphor for that which transcends every barrier of limitation in human consciousness. That's a mouthful. It transcends every barrier of limitation in human consciousness. So think about that. In human consciousness, we know that things begin, they are, and then they end. But that which we call God has no beginning and no end. In human consciousness, there are limits. There are exhaustible limits to power. There are exhaustible limits to resources. Excuse me. You know, there are finite limits to what can be achieved, but the divine has no limits. It is all powerful. In the human experience, there is limits to what can be known. In fact, we know that there are things that we can't know. These are called the unknown unknowns, you know. We know they're there, but we have no way of knowing what they are. and yet for the divine there are no unknowns. So this thing that we call God, it is a metaphor for that which transcends every limitation of human experience. So when is God? We say God is omnipresence, which means that all of God is everywhere present, which is something that the human mind cannot possibly comprehend intellectually. We can't grab a hold of that. And then the equally absurd question might seem, well, when is God? When is God? Of course, the Bible tells us the same yesterday, today, and forever. But see, God just is. God just is. There is no when. There is no when in the divine mind. No when. It just is. It is now, and it is always now. And every moment is now. You and I can think of the past. We can remember when we were children. We can think of the future. We can think about what we're going to do in our retirement. What are we going to do next week? What are we going to do on our vacation? You and I are kind of like lean, mean time machines. You know, we can flit around. If you remember, I think it was in the 1950s, they did a black and white movie of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. Rod Taylor was the actor who was in it. And they had a scene where he would get in the time machine and he would kind of set the dials, you know, to wherever he was going in the future, in the past. And the way that the cinematographer depicted that transition was, it was kind of like a movie screen behind him, you know, the way they used to do green screen. They would just show a movie behind him. And this movie was a fast forward of historical events, either imagined events of the future or actual events of the past. And this was the way that they were depicting, excuse me, the character played by Rod Taylor moving through time. But you and I can do that every minute of every day. We do that. See, the human experience is, if we think of something new, if we see something new, something we haven't ever seen before, our mind immediately flits back to the past, and we try to examine everything that we may have ever found that looks like that. What could it possibly be? Does it match anything? It's like now you go to the internet and you've got the Google reverse image search. So you have a picture of something, you don't know exactly what it is. You have something around the house, you don't know what it is. You take a picture of it, you do a reverse image search, and Google will search bazillions of images, and it will come back and say, we found these pictures that look similar to what you've got, and our best guess is that it is and they'll tell you. But our mind does that. The Google machine is just basically automating the way our minds work. Right? So we see something new and we immediately try to go back in the past and we relive all the different times that we have seen this. And if we come up with a match, then we try to project into the future, well, what are all the things that we could do with this in the future? What could we possibly do with this? So our mind is moving, our intellect is moving backwards and forwards in time, and it is constantly doing that, backwards and forwards, all the time. When I was in business, one of the activities I was involved in was strategic planning. And we would kind of look at the way things had been in the past, we would look at the way things are now, and then we would try to project into the future, 5 years into the future. Try to predict how what we had in front of us now, based on what we had experienced in the past, how it might unfold in the future. And what we would do is we would come up with the 3 most likely scenarios. Of all the different possibilities that are on our radar screen, we think that these 3 are the ones that are most likely. This is what the world of our business is most likely to look like in 5 years. And then we would come back in every 90 days. We would come back in and we would reevaluate the data in front of us, and we would say, you know, of those 3, is our first choice still first choice, or is our second choice becoming our first choice? We would kind of keep our eye on the way things were unfolding. And then every year we would come back in and formally reevaluate. Do we need to change our top 3? You know, is the things that we thought a year ago were going to happen, you know, are they still most likely, or do we need to have a different top 3? But my point is, we were constantly, in that process, we were constantly projecting into the future. And that's the way the human intellect works. And it's good, right? It has allowed human beings to evolve to the point where we are today, in consciousness to the point where we are today. Now that evolution is largely a technological evolution, and by that I mean that we've gotten very effective, we've gotten very efficient, we have very wonderful tools to do the things that used to take us a lot of time and labor to do. But we really haven't evolved spiritually very much as human beings, as spiritual beings having a human experience. If you think about the history here in the United States, when Thomas Jefferson was president, 95% of the population was involved in agriculture and farming. These were subsistence farmers, homesteaders, people who lived on their land. They grew their own food, they raised their own animals, they built their log cabins, those sorts of things. But that's what 95% of the population did when Jefferson was president. When George W. Bush was president, only 5% of our population was involved in agriculture. Agriculture had become so efficient through those years, those 200 and some odd years in between, that far fewer people needed to be involved in growing food in order to feed everybody, and there were a lot more people to feed. So our intellect has been able to help us to get more effective and more efficient, to build better machines, to do different things. But have we really, as a people, have we really benefited from that spiritually? Have we grown? Have we matured in consciousness, I guess is the better way of saying it. Emmett Fox tells us if we go back and we read a story in the Bible, in the Old Testament that was written 4,000 years ago, and we read about the interactions between Moses and Aaron and the Pharaoh, we understand what was going on there. There's a part of us that understands. Now Emmett Fox tells us, for two reasons. He says that every character in the Bible represents a state of consciousness, and we, at different times in our lives, we relate to that. We understand that consciousness. We know what it's like to be the Pharaoh. We know what it's like to be the Moses. We understand that consciousness. We understand what's going on there. We understand the human action because the human interaction hasn't changed a whole lot in thousands of years. The greed, the lust, the violence, all of the human traits, also the generosity and the kindness and the love. We understand those things, but they haven't really changed that much in all these years. We have gotten much more efficient at what we do, and unfortunately that applies to war as well as to feeding the hungry. We have gotten much more efficient and effective at what we do. But why we do those things, are we doing them for joy? That hasn't changed that much. So the human intellect is able to go backwards and forwards in time. It is able to make better and better machines. It is able to get more efficient at what it does. If you look at what's going on in society right now, you'll hear some of this conversation about universal basic income. And you say, well, what in the world is that all about? People can actually envision, they can project into the future a time when the machines will be doing so much work that there won't be enough work to keep everybody employed. And if there's not enough work to keep everybody employed, how are people going to make money to live? And if people don't have money to spend, then how are the people who sell them products and services going to get paid? And there's actually people looking down the road to say, well, maybe this idea of taxing robots and taxing machines as we used to tax people. Tax the machines that do the work and generate the money to give to the people to live. Interesting. It's an interesting idea to explore. The point I want to make of it is that it seems that the evolution, the human intellect that has allowed us to get this effective and this efficient at what we do has been bringing us to a point where we can just be. Just be. See, God is in the now. God is here. God is now. If we spend all our time living in the past, regretting the past, feeling guilty about the past, wishing we could change the past, we're not here now. If we spend all of our time in the future thinking about how wonderful it's going to be or how terrible it's going to be, we worry about the future. we are not here now. We need to be. We need to be. This is why Troward says, if we can see it as an already accomplished fact, it is done now. It is done now. It is not going to happen. It is not unfolding. It is not happening. It is done. It is done in divine mind. We have to bring ourselves into the present tense because God is only to be found in the present tense. And too many of us have spent our lives growing up in traditions that told us that God is something we will experience in the future. If we live a good enough life now, then at some point down the road, some point in the future, when we die and go to heaven, we will get to experience God. Dr. Holmes tells us that we've made it too complicated and we look too far away. He says the child sees God on the playground. The farmer sees God in the field. The mother sees God when she holds her baby in her arms. See? We have to be here now. We have to be in this moment now. And that takes conscious effort on our part. Many of the symbols that we get from the Jewish Bible and from the Christian Bible depict the shepherd, because the shepherd was a character that everybody knew in that culture. The shepherd loved its sheep. The shepherd cared for its sheep. The sheep were raised to be sheared for their wool. The goats were raised for their milk. And these animals were not raised for slaughter. They were raised as pets, And this is why there was a blessing, and I can't tell you exactly where it is, but somewhere in the Bible there's a blessing. What had happened to one of the shepherds is something happened to one of its animals. It got hurt, and he had to kill the animal to keep it from suffering. And they didn't waste anything, so they ate it. They cooked it and they ate it. And he invited somebody to come over to the meal, and the toast the guest made was, "May you never have to eat another animal again." His blessing was, you lost one of your friends here. May this never happen to you again. So the shepherd cared for its sheep, and we have the crook, the shepherd's crook, the staff that was carried about. And what would happen is that as the sheep would go about, if they straggled off course, the shepherd would just use that hook to bring them back. If they fell in a ditch, could use the hook to pull them out. But the shepherd was always with them, always guiding them, always guarding them, always loving them, always caring for them. And this is why we get the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. I lack nothing. Leads me into the green pastures, not the dried out grass, but the green pastures. Leads me beside the still waters. And not the water that's going so fast that the sheep will fall in and drown. Not the water that's going so slow that it gets stagnant and it's bad. But the still waters. You see, so this image that we are getting from David, the image that we are getting is this image of divine love, that God is always with us now. Now, right here and right now. And we have to train ourselves. We have to have that little shepherd's hook for ourselves, so that when our mind starts to wander off into the past, we have to come back and say, be here now. And if our mind tends to go off to the future, we need to say, be here now. And we need to bring it back. And this is why meditation is such an important spiritual practice. Can you just sit and be with your breath for 20 minutes, for 10 minutes, for 5 minutes? Can you just sit and be with your breath without getting your thoughts tangled in the past or in the future? Can you just sit and be in the breath? Because when we can just sit and be, when we can get the activity of the mind to still down, then we find the presence, the omnipresence. Then we can experience God in the now. And this is what our spiritual evolution should be about. So physical evolution has taken us to the point where we can actually envision a time in the not too distant future where work is not going to be as it is today. And what will we do? I think we should be. So the first point, we have to be here. We have to be here and now. And the second point is to visualize, to use our power of vision as a spiritual tool. We hear a lot about visualization, and sometimes visualization is taught as a magical power, magic with a K, M-A-G-I-K, I think, is the way people put it. It's kind of one of these esoteric beliefs, that that you can use the power of your mind to manipulate things. We're not looking at it from that perspective. We're not trying to manipulate things. We're not trying to make things happen. We're not trying to force anything to happen that wouldn't already happen. What we are doing is using our power of imagination, our power of creation, to create within our own mind the vision of that which we desire as an already accomplished fact. It is already done. That's all we are trying to do. Once we do that, then the power, we're going to talk about how it works in a minute, but then the power moves through that image. The visual of a film strip in a projector. How many of us in school we sat through, God, do you remember those? They had the film strip projector and they had the little cassette recorder, and every once in a while the cassette recorder would go beep. And the teacher was supposed to advance the film strip one slide, and of course they never happened. They always got out of sync, and it was always pretty funny. Right? But think of that image on the film strip. The light in the projector doesn't care what's on the film. But once we put that film strip, once we cooperate with the optical laws of the way the projector works, once we put that film strip in front of the light, and we let that light shine through the lens where it is focused on the wall. Once we do that, that's all we need to do, you see. And then that image is there. And what you and I are doing is we are creating the image. That's all we are doing, is creating the image. And the power of the universe is doing the rest to project that, to project the outpicturing, not just the image, but to project the outpicturing, the actual experience into our lives. So many times we talk about treatment, and it's kind of a verbal activity. We may not speak the words, but we're thinking the words. And what I keep saying is we want to get beyond the words. We use the words to prime the pump to get the process started. But then the feeling comes up, and from the feeling, then the rest of the words come. And what I'm suggesting today is another technique. It is a technique of visual treatment. Now, we know in sports, for example, they tell athletes to visualize themselves completing whatever task it is. Jack Nicklaus wrote a book on golf. And he said before he took a shot, he always visualized the swing and how it felt, and heard the sound of the club head moving through the air, and felt the contact of the club with the ball, and saw the ball going right into the very spot wherever he wanted it to go. Kind of taught that as a psychological technique. Maxwell Maltz in Psycho-Cybernetics wrote a whole book about self-image psychology back in the 60s. It's a bit dated now, but it's still very powerful. And his whole point was unless his patients, he was a plastic surgeon, he said unless his patients changed their self-image, no matter how skilled his surgery was, they still perceived themselves as being deformed in some way. And on the other hand, he had people who had some type of a physical abnormality, growth or something on their face, and he offered to remove it, and they said, why? It's perfect. The image, the self-image they hold. So what Dr. Holmes tells us is, for example, if you wanted a new home, if you wanted a new house to live in, you could visualize this home. What color is it? See? What color are the shutters? What color are the curtains in the window? Are the windows open and the curtains flapping in the breeze? You know, the example he gave us was like a little farmhouse out in the country, which he had an affinity for. I think he grew up in the backwoods of Maine and always had an affinity for the country. Can we feel ourselves, our feet going up the steps, up the front porch? Can we hear the floorboards and the sound our feet make on the floorboards? Can we smell the paint? Can you smell the trees and the grass all around? Can you kind of get into this feeling? Can you sit down on the rocking chair on the front porch and maybe pick up the pitcher of lemonade that is there and pour yourself a glass of lemonade and taste it, sour and sweet both at the same time, and look out over the railing. And what do you see? What kind of shrubbery is there? What kind of trees are there? What's in the distance? Is it a pasture? Is it a forest? Are there other houses? Can you smell it? So what he was suggesting is that we create this experience in our mind, this image that we're putting onto the film strip, to create this image into our consciousness. And when we've done that, what he said is we've given ourselves a visual treatment. We've gone through the process of treatment as we know it, but we have done it using images instead of using words. Can we see whatever it is? Can we see whatever our joy wishes to experience or to create in our lives? Can we see it as an already accomplished fact? See, most of the time, we are doing this entire process, but we are doing it backwards, and it's called worry. We see the thing we don't want, and we experience it as if it was happening now. And if it's frightening, our heart beats fast and our breathing gets shallow and we start to sweat. And our intellect has raced forward to the future and figured out everything that could possibly go wrong, and it has come back to the now, and we are anxious in the now. And we know how to do that. We do it very well. We do it. Our intellect evolved to do that because it's a way of protecting us. It's a way of protecting us at the human level, but we're not working at the human level anymore. We are working at the spiritual level. So what is this thing that your heart desires? What is this thing that Spirit is nudging you to do? What is this thing that Spirit is nudging you to experience? Can you remove all human ideas of limitation and all of the reasons why not? Why it can't be, why it won't be, why it couldn't happen? Which is the equivalent of going into the cave and saying, but it's been dark for 40,000 years. Maybe my candle's not bright enough. Maybe my light won't work. Can we remove every idea of human limitation because they come from the intellect going back in the past, and they come from the intellect racing forward to the future? And right now, right here, right now, can we get in touch with what it is that God would experience through us today? We have to recognize the process that we're talking about. And Dr. Holmes gives us a couple of different examples of how it works. One of them we may not be too familiar with today. He's talking about iron in a foundry. They go into a foundry and they throw chunks of what they call pig iron into a pot, a big pot. Now, when I was a kid, we used to make fishing weights ourselves. We had a little pot, we had a torch that would heat the pot, and we would get lead. You could go to the hardware store. I'm thinking now how bad lead is for you, but we would go buy lead at the hardware store, chunks of lead. And you go home and you put the lead in the pot, and you turn the torch on, a little propane torch, and it would heat up this pot. And when the pot got hot enough, the lead would melt, it become liquid. And we had a little mold, and the mold looked just like fishing weights. We called them sinkers. It was a little lead weight, and it had a hole in the top that you tied your string to. And you would take this pot. We had big asbestos gloves, which were also not good for you. And we would hold this big hot pot, and we would pour the molten lead. And Dr. Holmes's point is that it doesn't make any difference what shape that mold is. See, the lead will take whatever shape is in there. The lead doesn't care. The liquid lead doesn't care. But we have to provide the mold. We have to think of the stuff, he called it the stuff of the universe. We have to think of the stuff of the universe as being plastic. That's the way he described it, moldable. You know, you could melt it and it would take whatever shape you wanted. He gives us another example of, imagine that we are floating in an ocean and all around us are icebergs, but these icebergs are a perfect reflection of our thoughts. So we think of a giraffe and an iceberg appears, it looks like a giraffe. We think of a cow and an iceberg appears, it thinks of a cow. We think of a dog and an iceberg appears and it looks like a dog. And what he's telling us is that we are constantly thinking. This is most important. We are constantly thinking. We are constantly believing something. And because we are constantly believing something, all of these different experiences are popping up all around us. And what we want to do today, what I invite us to consider today, is there is a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. And it does it all the time, 24/7. It's like gravity. You know, gravity doesn't stop working when you go to bed. There's this power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief, and we are constantly believing something. And it is constantly producing in our experience the perfect outpicturing of our belief. What we must do to evolve spiritually is to become conscious co-creators. Instead of letting our intellect run willy-nilly to the past and to the future and to worry and to do all of these things, we need to decide. That's the one thing that we can do, is decide. We have will and volition. Decide. What is it? What is it that I would like for God to experience through me now? Right now. Not down the road, not in the past. Now. Right now. This instant. What is it that I would like God to experience through me now? And can you see it as an already accomplished fact? And can you keep that image in front of you? Can you keep that image with you until it appears? See, a lot of times we sit down and say, this is what I want, and then a second later we're over here and say, well, that's what I want, and a second later we're back over that way and we say, no, that's what I want. Emmett Fox says, change your mind and keep it changed. Can you bring your mind? Can you bring the visual? Can you bring the sensory experience, the smell, the sights, the sounds of the demonstration of that which you would experience, of that which you would have God experience as you today? And I think that that's very important to consider. What would God experience through me today? What would the divine experience as me today? Because when we start to do that, automatically our less than perfect motives go away. Holmes says, is this thing that you desire create a greater expression of life and love and truth and beauty? Does it rob anyone or harm no one? And that's the only checklist you need. Once you say to yourself, well, what is it that God could experience as me today? Any ideas of selfishness are gone. Any ideas of greed or anger or all those human characteristics are gone. We are spiritual beings. Human evolution has brought consciousness to this place. We have gone as far as we need to go with the intellect once we have become spiritually aware. It doesn't mean we won't think. It doesn't mean we won't reason. But it means we will no longer see the intellect as the be-all, end-all, and supreme. We will recognize the spiritual nature as the supreme. So we need to take time to practice. Dr. Holmes tells us we need two things. We need to understand the theory and we need to practice. So we need to take time to practice. We need to take time in our meditation to bring our thoughts into the now, bring our experience into the now. And we need to take time to deliberately visualize, to see, to create the image as being an already accomplished fact here and now of that which we would experience, and then watch that appear in our lives. Divine love has created each and every one of us out of itself as its individualized expressions of joy. It's time to stop living our lives as if we were merely human and to begin living our lives as if we were totally divine. It is for this purpose we have come, to awaken to our spiritual nature. Let's let today be the day. And so it is.